Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Chapter 9, in which the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean show themselves propitious to Phileas Fogg's designs. The distance between Suez and Aden is exactly 1,310 miles, and the timetable of its company allowed its steamer a period of 138 hours to make distance. The Mongolia, whose fires were well kept, moved along rapidly enough to anticipate her stipulated arrival. Nearly all passengers who came aboard at Brinsley had India for their destination. Some were going to Bombay, others to Calcutta, but via Bombay, for since a railway crossed the entire breadth of the Indian peninsula, it no longer necessary to double the island of Ceylon. Among these passengers of the Mongolia, several officials of civil service and army officers of every grade. Of the latter, some belonged to the British Army, some properly so called, and others commanded the Navy sepoy troops, receiving high salaries, since the government had taken the place of powers in charge of old East India Company, sub-lieutenants receiving 280 euros, brigaders 400 euros, and generals 4,000 euros. The elements of officials in the civil service are still higher. Simple assistants in the first rank get 480 euros. Judges get 2,400 euros. The president judges 10,000 euros. Governors 12,000 euros. And the governor general for more than 24,000 euros. There was good living on board the Mongolia. In this company of officials, to make which were added some young Englishmen, who, with 1 million in their pocket, were going to establish commercial houses abroad. The purser, the confidential man of a company, the equal of a captain on board a ship, did up things elegantly. At breakfast, at the lunch of 2 o'clock, at dinner at 5:30, and at supper 8 o'clock. The tables groaned under the dishes of fresh meat and relishes, furnished by the refrigerator and pantries of the steamer. The ladies, of whom were a few, changed their toilets twice a day. There was music, and there was dancing also when sea allowed it. But the Red Sea is very capricious and too frequently rough. Like all narrow bodies of water, when the wind blew of the coast of Asia or the coast of Africa, the Mongolia, being very long and sharp-built, and struck amidships, rolled fearfully. Then the ladies disappeared. The pianos were silent, songs and dances ceased at once. And, notwithstanding the squall and agitated waters, the steamer, driven by its powerful engines, pursued its course without delay straight to the the Straits of Bab el Mandeb. What was Phileas Fogg doing all this time? It might be supposed that, always uneasy and anxious, his mind had been occupied with the changes of the wind interfering with the progress of the vessel, the irregular movements of the squall threatening an accident to the engine, and in short, all the possible injuries which, compelling the Mongolia to put into some port, would have interrupted his journey. By no means, or at least, if this gentleman thought of these probabilities, he had not let it appear as if he did. He was the same impassible man, the same imputable member of the Reform Club, whom no incident or accident could surprise. He did not appear more affected than the ship's chronometers. He was seldom seen upon deck. He troubled himself very little about looking in this Red Sea, so fruitful in recollections, the spot where the first historic scenes of mankind were enacted. He did not recognize the curious towns scattered upon its shores, whose picturesque outlines stood sometimes against the horizon. He did not even dream of the dangers of the Gulf of Arabia, of which the ancient historians Strabo Arius, Artemidorus, and others always spoke with dread, and upon which the navigators never ventured in former times without having consecrated their voyage by propitiatory sacrifices. What was this queer fellow, imprisoned upon the Mongolia, doing? At first he took his 4 meals a day, in the rolling and pitching of the ship, not putting out of his order his mechanism, so wonderfully organized, then he played at whist, for he found companions as devoted to it as himself, a collector of taxes who was going to his post at Goy, a minister, the Rev. Mrs. Smith, returning to Bombay, a brigadier general of the British Army, who was rejoining his corps at Benar. These three passengers had the same passion for whist as Mr. Fogg. They had played for entire hours, not less quietly than he. As for Passepartout, seasickness had taken no hold on him. He occupied a forward cabin and ate conscientiously. It may be said that the voyage made under these circumstances was decidedly not unpleasant to him. He had rather liked his share of it. Well fed and well lodged, he was seeing the country, and besides, he asserted to himself that all the swim would end at Bombay. The next day, after leaving Suez, it was not without a certain pleasure that he met on deck an obliging person whom he had addressed on landing in Egypt. "I am not mistaken," he said on very approaching him with his most amiable smile. "You are the very gentleman that so kindly served as my guide in Suez?" "Indeed," replied the detective, "I recognize you. You are that servant of that odd Englishman." "Just so, Monsieur Fix," replied Passepartout. "Delighted to meet you again on board this vessel. And where are you going?" "Why, to the same place as yourself. Bombay. That is the first rate. Have you already made this trip?" "Several times. I am an agent of the Peninsular Company." "Then you know India?" "Why, yes," replied Fix, who did not wish to commit himself too far. "Is this India in a curious place?" "Very curious. Mosques, minarets, temples, fakirs, pagodas, tigers, serpents, dancing girls. But it is hoped that you will have time to visit the country?" "Oh, I hope, sir, too, Monsieur Fix. You understand very well it is not permitted for a man of sound mind to pass his life from jumping on from a steamer into a railway car and the railway car to a steamer, under the pretext of making the tour of the world in 80 days. No, all these gymnastics will cease at Bombay, no doubt it. And Mr. Fogg as well?" "Very well, Fix. And I am too. I eat like an ogre that has been fasting. It's the sea air. I never see your master on deck. Never. He is not inquisitive. Do you know, Mr. Passepartout, that this pretended hour in 80 days may well be the cover for some secret mission, diplomatic mission, for example? Upon my word, Monsieur Fix, I don't know anything about it, I confess. I really wouldn't give a half-crown to know." After this meeting, Passepartout and Fix frequently talked together. The detective thought he ought to have close relations with the servant of this gentleman Fogg. There might be an occasion where he could serve him, frequently offered him, in the bedroom of the Mongolia, a few glasses of whisky or pale ale, which the good fellow accepted without reluctance, and returned even so not to be as behind him, finding this Fix to be a very honest gentleman. In the meantime the steamer was rapidly getting on. On the 13th they sighted Macha, which was appeared in the closures of ruined walls, upon which there hanging green date trees at a distance in the mountains, and there were seen immense fields of coffee trees. Passepartout was delighted to behold this celebrated place. He found, with its circular walls and dismantled fort in the shape of the handle, it looked like an enormous cup and saucer. During the following night Mongolia passed through the Straits of Bab el Mandeb, the Arabic name of which signifies the Gate of Tears. The next day, the 14th, she put at a steamer point, to the northwest of Aden harbour. There was she to lay in coal again. This obtaining fuel for steamers at such distances and centuries of production is a very serious matter, in about to an annual expense for the Peninsular Company of £800,000. It had been necessary, indeed, to establish depots in several ports. In these distant seas coals reached to as high as for 3 to 4 pounds per ton. The Mongolias had still 1,650 miles to make before reaching Bombay, and she had to remain 4 more hours at Steamer Point, delayed in her coal. But this delay could not be any way prejudicial to Phileas Fogg's programme. It was foreseen, besides, the Mongolia, instead of not arriving at Aden till the morning of the 15th, they were put in the evening of the 14th, the gain of 15 hours. Mr. Fogg and his servant landed, and this gentleman wished to have his passport visa fixed followed him without being noticed. In the formality of visa through it, Phileas Fogg returned on board to resume his interrupted play. Passepartout, according to his customs, loitered in about the midst of the populations of Somalians, Parsees, Jews, Arabs, Europeans, making up 25,000 inhabitants of Aden. He admired the fortification of this town and Gibraltar of the Indian Ocean, and some splendid cistern citerns, after at which the English engineers were still working 2,000 years after the engineers of King Solomon. Very singular, said Passepartout to on the returning aboard. I see that is not useless for travel, if we should see anything new. At 6 o'clock p.m. the Mongolia was plowing the waters of Aden harbor, and soon reached the Indian Ocean. She had 186 hours to make the distance between Aden and Bombay, and the Indian Ocean was very favourable to her. The wind kept in northwest, and the sails come to aid in the steam. The ship is well balanced, rolled less, the ladies in fresh toilets reappeared on the deck. Singing and dancing recommenced. Their voyage was then progressing under most favourable circumstances. Passepartout was delighted with the agreeable companion whom chance had procured for him in the person of Fix. On Sunday, the 20th of October, towards noon, they sighted the Indian coast. 2 hours later, the pilot came aboard, and the Mongolia outlined the hills, blended with the sky. Soon, the rows of the palm trees, which abound in the place, came into the distinct view, and the steamer entered the harbour and formed in the island of Saklet, Kolba, Elephanta, Butcher, and half-past 4 she was put in the wharf of Bombay. Phileas Fogg was then finishing the 33rd rubber of the day, and his partner and himself, thanks to a bold manoeuvre, making 13 tricks, wounded up this fine day by a splendid victory. The Mongolia was not due to Bombay until the 22nd of October. She arrived on the 20th. This was a gain of 2 days, and since his departure on London, Phileas Fogg methodically noted down his memorandum book in the column of gains.